Welcome to the Body Smart Book Club, where we talk about the best of what we've read. Today we're going over Chapter 3 of Mark Sisson's Primal Endurance. This chapter is called The Primal Blueprint Eating Strategy. So we're going to be talking about nutrition. I'm Melody, this is Mark, and we've got Preston with us again, and we're excited to be with you. All right, so first thing, we decided that we're going to talk about what we loved about this chapter.
Yeah. Always start with the positives.
Yes. So something we really liked about this chapter is Mark is all about eating high quality, nutrient dense foods. And we are big believers in that, right? Eat your fruits, eat your veggies, get rid of the processed foods, get rid of the sugars, get rid of the bad carbs. And he's all about that.
Definitely. Both Marks approve of quality nutrient dense.
Double Mark approved.
Yes. We should have a stamp for that. No, I really like that. It's funny. We were talking earlier about the what he calls the standard American diet, and the acronym is SAD. But it's true, right? Like I think our typical diet is pretty sad, and it just trends towards overeating with a really heavy reliance on carbs and on not good quality carbs, right? On highly processed, highly refined carbs, high sugars, which are delicious. We won't deny that, right? Like, who doesn't love your like triple chocolate brownie fudge whatever concoction, right? Like
yes,
I'll eat that all day. Delicious.
Yeah, great.
But just the idea of let's really take a deep look at what we're eating and why we're eating and see how we can change that and improve the quality of our foods and make sure that they have those vital nutrients that we need and getting those nutrients from whole food sources. Because as we look into the literature, we find that there's a big difference between getting our vitamins and minerals in whole foods, right? Fruits and vegetables and good whole grains, things like that, versus taking a supplement. There's just not the same effects, especially when you consider that supplements aren't even controlled or governed at all by the FDA, right? Like people can pretty much put whatever they want in there.
That's kind of scary.
Yeah, it is kind of scary.
It is.
And I really liked what you had to say earlier about kind of like looking at what types of foods that we're eating and then how we can change that.
Yeah, so essentially, the nutrients that we get as we eat is what is going to carry out the everyday functions of our body. And so if you're missing certain holes in your diet where you're missing certain nutrients or certain food groups, then you're not going to be able to function in the best way that your body can. And so instead of focusing on cutting out specific groups where you may be missing certain nutrients within your diet, focusing on upgrading those, upgrading what you currently eat to something that's a little bit more nutrient dense than it already is. So the example I gave, I'm a big lover of Reese's peanut butter cups. They're my favorite candy
So good.
by far. I can eat those all day. But if that's your main source of carbs, there's definitely better choices that you can make to get more healthy carbs and better nutrients along with it. And so upgrading that to, some whole grain bread or a bagel or something like that, as opposed to just snacking on your candy all day, may be a better option for you.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's when we were talking about that, it reminded me, I upgraded in the wrong way, my meal choices in college. So first I started with just like making a regular burrito. And then I was like, oh, you know what'd be like super delicious is if I like put bacon in this burrito, right? So I would just like do a bunch of that. And then like my final upgrade was like, so it's really dang good, but what if I used the leftover bacon grease to fry the burrito in after I made it? And it was
Nice.
it was so good, right? but like probably not the best thing to be taken into my body on a regular basis. That's like that was my phase of experimentation in college.
Yeah, mine was very similar. I was super motivated at first, to cook all these great foods and be healthy. And then the longer time went on and the more busy I got, the more I found myself in the frozen food aisle, getting frozen pizzas and frozen, I don't know what else you can find in there.
Seriously though, that's the trap that all of America has fallen into, right? We don't have time. We don't have the time and we don't have the money. It takes a ton of time to prep your food, and something that you were talking about earlier is if you make the commitment to eat healthy, you literally need to sit down and think, what other things in my life do I need to drop so I actually have time to do this? Because it takes a ton of time.
Yeah. So how do you prioritize that with your own nutrition? Be able to get the right nutrients and making sure that you have the time to make those meals.
It's about planning. This is how I do it. Every Sunday night, I sit down, I open up my cookbook, I figure out what I'm going to make. Each night of the week, I make a list of the ingredients that I need. I make a plan of, okay, Monday, I'm going to go buy all the ingredients. And then I have to literally plan it and put it in my schedule. Here's an hour every night to cook food. And I'm not going to pretend that I'm perfect that I'm perfect at that, because I definitely am not. This week has been a hard week. It's been especially busy for me and especially busy for my husband. So we have resorted to oatmeal for dinner. But the thing is, you just do the best you can. And when you do mess up, when you do eat something unhealthy, you just get back up and you try again and you try to do better the next day instead of beating yourself up over eating something bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very fluid aspect of our lives, what we're eating and when we eat it. A lot of times that is dependent on how our body is feeling. And what we feel like we need at that time. If you spend a lot of time outdoors and you were sweating a lot from whatever the activity was you're doing, you may be lacking in sodium or in your different electrolytes. And so you may be craving something a little bit more salty. And so keeping an open mind, like you said, not beating yourself up about any pitfalls that you may have had in the past or that you may experience as you go forward. We'll all have them. But moving on from them and just continuing to try to be better is going to be the most important part of what we're doing.
For sure. And I think it's about just coming up with a system that works for you and your schedule. And I think also learning to eat healthy, like kind of like what you mentioned, is there's a lot of trial and error in the system, and also in learning what foods work for your body. Mm-hmm. Some people swear that dairy's going to kill you, and some people swear that meat is horrible, and other people swear that it's great. And you just have to practice and figure out, this makes me feel good and this doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's one of the big points the book actually makes is, listening to your body and making sure that you're using the cues that you get to be able to dictate what you're eating and when you're eating it.
For sure. And I think that takes a lot of practice too, is learning how to communicate with your body. Learning that, okay, this is what I need. I need sugar, or because sometimes we need sugar. Sugar is actually good for you. Good sugar. Maybe I need sugar, maybe I need salt. Am I low on electrolytes? Am I low on carbs? And I think that, again, especially as an athlete, that just takes practice and tuning into your body and figuring out what your body needs.
Yeah, I love that idea that you both brought up, though, that like even with having a system in place, it still ends up being fluid. And I think that's one of the really good points that he brought up in the book, kind of called it a fractal eating pattern. I definitely have conditioned myself like, oh, it's breakfast. Yeah, it's breakfast. Oh, man, I can't wait till lunch. And oh, man, I had lunch. I can't wait till dinner, right?
Yeah.
Like it's these established times and we have to eat this then, and we have to eat this much at this time, and really kind of pigeonholing ourselves into a very like narrow definition of what our diet should be. But I think, right, like taking the time to learn what our bodies need and listening to those cues, and not being tied down to having to eat this at a specific time every day, but depending on our activity level, depending on our stress levels, depending on a bunch of different factors on what's going on in our life to really make sure that we're getting the right nutrients when we need them, and not according to like some pre-established perfect regime that we have in our minds.
Yeah, and we're going to get into some of the contrasting opinions that we have of some of the things he has on there later on. But some of the greatest advice that I had received as an athlete going through the collegiate system is that whenever you're hungry, you eat. And it's super basic, but how many times do we have the thought come into our mind where we're hungry, but we're like, oh, I can't eat right now. Like, it's unhealthy. I'm in between meals. And you're starting to think of all these different ways that food could be negative for you. But we got to remember that nutrients and calories are our building blocks for our body. That making sure that we eat and we eat enough of the good things is what's going to allow us to recover, to perform better, and to become better athletes, and overall just function the way we should be.
Yeah.
I love that. It sounds like you've developed a really good relationship with food.
Yeah, well, like I said, I can't say that I'm perfect either. There's definitely things where I am not as good at that you may be better at. Like I said, sometimes I settle for the things that are going to be the easiest to make, that I can just grab, stick in the microwave, and have it done in 3 minutes, and lots of times that isn't the best choice as far as like quality of food. So that's maybe something that I could upgrade within my diet to be a little better, to have something a little bit more fresh fruits and vegetables, things that haven't been in the freezer for a year.
Right. That being said, I think it is important though to have quick grab and go things for when you are hungry. And so instead of reaching for the quick unhealthy thing, you're reaching for the quick healthy thing, right? Like I really love there are these little like avocado cups that I get from Sam's Club, and I love just grabbing one of those, and then a bag of broccoli or a bag of carrots, and then you have a quick yummy snack.
Yeah, well, and I love that because it ends up being all about choices, and I think that's one of the things where we really shoot ourselves in the foot a lot of times, is that we allow our quick and easy grabs to be unhealthy things, like versus those like, let me grab an avocado cup, or like a handful of nuts and seeds, or like this thing of strawberries. And so I think that's one way that we can really set ourselves up for success, is that when we go shopping, when we do that planning, that we just make the choice beforehand that I'm not going to get a bunch of that of the other stuff.
Don't go grocery shopping when you're hungry.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's why I like you had a list too, because that makes it a lot easier to know. Okay, like this is what I have to go get. You're not walking down all these aisles looking for things. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, and that's not to say, right, that like having the Reese's peanut butter cups or having ice cream or whatever those things are bad, right? I think that's where we really run into problems, is when we demonize any food group or any type of food. But that just like if the overall majority of our choices are towards healthy options, and we make some of those choices before we have to make the hunger choice, right? Oh, I already chose to do the thing, shop this way on my list, so that the foods that I have in my home like limit some of those negative choices that I could potentially take.
Exactly.
And I think that you both brought up another good point in that, like eating when you're hungry and using like actual hunger as a cue versus using boredom, or I'm watching a movie, or I'm having this social event and so I have to eat food.
Or I'm totally depressed.
I'm totally depressed, right?
The whole pan of brownies.
Yeah. And so again, I think really the idea of let's change our relationship with food. Let's dive into not only what we're eating, the quality of what we're eating, but why we're eating it, and what drives those decisions that we're making. And I think being able to approach it from that perspective really can do a lot for our relationship with food and how we're choosing to fuel ourselves.
I love that.
Definitely. The end.
The end. Mic drop. So, but I think within that, right, the idea of listening to your body and making those good choices, we have to be careful, right? Like I think that while in a sense that's really good advice, right? Listen to your body, learn how you work, learn to be more in touch with how you're feeling and why you make decisions. There's a caveat that comes with that, because sometimes our hunger, our appetite cues aren't appropriate, right? They've been basically hijacked from a lifetime of choices. And our brain signals, no, you definitely need that 50th cookie, right? Like you got to put that in your mouth and do it now. I'm still hungry, right? Yeah. And so I guess really listening to your body in the context of making healthy choices.
I'm trying to think of like different ways, that I decipher I need this food because it's the nutrients I need, and I need this food because it sounds really good to eat. And so I'm trying to think of like, different internal questions that I ask myself. And I guess maybe going through that checklist before, you grab that 50th cookie. You're like, am I eating this because of an emotion that I have? Or am I eating this because it's something that I need for my body? And maybe just checking yourself at the door before you prepare a meal to make sure that you're hitting all the different groups that you need, as opposed to just grabbing random things until you're full.
Yeah.
That's a really good idea to have that checklist of questions so you can learn to listen to your body. I definitely struggle with that. There's definitely times where I tell my husband, I need chocolate. I need you to go to the store and get some right now.
Yeah.
And he always tells me, you don't need it. And I'm like, I do.
I do.
That's a hard one to balance.
So for those times you need chocolate, it's okay. We understand.
Well, it comes down like when you have a bag of potato chips. Like, if you have the entire bag sitting there with you, you're just going to keep snacking. Like, it's just almost this learned movement of subconsciously just picking up a potato chip and eating it. And so breaking that down into different, a smaller group of it. So maybe just like taking a few of them out, putting the bag away, and then starting to eat may be able to help you limit some of those extra servings that we get naturally. Because I think we're all guilty of that.
For sure. No, that's an awesome tip. Another tip that I don't remember where I heard it, but someone said, if you can't tell if you're actually hungry or if it's emotional hunger, ask yourself, am I hungry enough to eat an apple right now, or am I hungry enough to eat broccoli right now? And if the answer is yes, you know
Oh my gosh, that's such a good question.
That is really good.
No, the answer is always no.
Yeah.
I'm not eating an apple.
So, another tip, my sister taught me this. She actually, she lost a lot of weight on her mission by doing this. She went and she bought little bowls and little plates, and she could, so she could more easily portion out her food. So she wasn't eating a ton, and then she wasn't allowed to have seconds. So she would fill up her little bowl, or she'd fill up her little plate, and she wouldn't eat as much. So her cupboard's filled with like all these baby bowls and plates.
Like, how many children do you have here? No, I think that's actually a really great idea, right? Like being able to limit portion size, and again, that becomes a cue that you don't even have to choose. Instead of being like, oh, here's all this food, I'll only put this much on my plate. It's like, well, I only have this much space on my plate to.
It's a mental thing, because you still
yeah.
have a full plate of food, you know.
Yeah. When you have that big plate, it's almost like you feel like you have to fill it up all the way.
Yeah.
So seeing that extra space on there, it just feels wrong. It's like,
Yeah, no white
put
space.
more
Yeah.
food on there.
Yeah, exactly. And also another tip that I recently learned is you don't have to finish all of your food on the plate. If you're full, stop eating. You can save it for tomorrow. If you have to throw away some food, throw away some food. It's not worth binging.
Yeah. Like, why would you finish the food and force yourself to eat it when it's not giving you the satisfaction that you want from it? When you can save it for later and still get that satisfaction from it. We definitely feel like you said, like it just is there, and so we have to eat it.
Right.
Yeah.
Or that's what you tell yourself, oh, I have to eat this.
Yeah, it comes back from when you're a kid and your mom's forcing you to eat your vegetables on your plate and you're trying to hide them in your pocket or something.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I think those are all good things. I remember just in different conversations I've had kind of relating to things like that. I remember one time my mom was like, oh, do you want this little extra stuff? Like, this isn't enough to put away. I'm like, no, like, I don't want that. I don't need that. She's like, oh, Dad'll eat it. I'm like, no, like,
Dad always eats the leftover
right, Dad
food.
always eats leftovers, right? Which is kind of like a cultural thing. Oh, right, like Dad is going to be the garbage disposal, and that's right,
That is
right.
funny.
But every time it's right. Those like extra 100 or 200 calories, like over years and years, that adds up, and that adds up, adding on the pounds. And so just small behavioral tweaks can really go a long way in building long-term health. Yeah. And so I think those are all really great points that we brought up. One thing that we really discussed a bunch in talking about, like the type of foods, right? Like we said, we love that Mark said, let's choose high quality, nutrient dense foods. But one of the things that we had a hard time with is him attacking certain foods, certain groups of foods, because we feel like that. Again, it went back to that idea of like, oh, we're going to demonize a group of foods. Let's put it out, which on the one hand can lead to some unhealthy relationships with food, but also like it really ends up cutting out things that are beneficial and that have been proven to be beneficial, especially in relation to like how it affects the profile for like cardiovascular diseases. One of the big ones being whole grains. I know we had a big conversation about that earlier.
Yeah, so when we're cutting out our whole grains like that, really that's going to be our best sort of our complex carbohydrates, which when you're speaking from the terms of a competitive athlete trying to increase your performance, that's your main and most efficient fuel source. And so when you're cutting out that, you're really limiting the number of carbohydrates you can get. And you're already, your body can only store a finite amount of carbs. Usually people, even if they're super lean, have, an excess of fat calories and enough energy there to last for a long time. That's why when you're doing ultra marathons and things like that, being able to use your fat very efficiently is very beneficial for you, because you can store so much of it. But especially when we're talking about, like a marathon or a half marathon, I would say non-ultra marathon distances, you're going at faster speeds, you're really looking for that performance side of things. Making sure they have your carbs is super important. And so that's why I had a hard time with this concept in the book, was when he's saying to cut out these grains and things like that, I'm thinking, what does that do for me as a performance-based athlete? And the idea that came to my mind was, what is his goal? What is his background from this? What is he trying to accomplish, as opposed to what am I trying to accomplish? Mm-hmm. Trying to see, why what he's doing maybe is right for what his goal is. And we mentioned this in our previous one, he's like a pretty built, almost like a bodybuilder type of guy.
So shredded.
Really strong. And so one of the biggest points of being able to cut out the grains and being able to decrease the number of carbohydrates you're taking is that you're going to become really lean. You're not going to be able to hold on to all those extra fat stores, because you're going to be burning them as opposed to your carbs. And so for him, maybe his perspective was that if he cuts out the grains and he cuts out some of those carbohydrates, he's going to be able to become more lean and become stronger that way. Whereas, me coming from a performance background, I need those carbohydrate stores in my muscles so that I can go run whatever the workout or whatever the race is that weekend.
Yeah, that's totally true. And like you said, maybe his goal was, to look really good. And with what he's doing by cutting out lots of carbs and grains, that works. You do drop the fat and you do become really lean, and that works for him. But I definitely can tell, I've experimented with a lot of things, and as I've researched and been trying to learn what works for me, and I have definitely noticed a big difference when I cut out carbs versus when I'm eating carbs. When I'm eating carbs, especially when I'm training, I have a lot more energy. I feel like I can think clear. I feel like I can go further. And I did go through a phase where I tried to cut out the carbs and I tried to become fat adaptive, and I got really tired and really sluggish, and I was sleeping a lot. My times were dropping. And so just from personal experience, I just don't see how cutting out carbs is healthy when your goal is to get faster and stronger as an athlete. They're definitely important.
Yeah, I think a lot of our listeners can relate to that in, they're going out for their own long runs, and they've been taught and probably practiced taking in some kind of a carbohydrate within their run, whether that comes in a gel form or they carry fruit snacks with them, or something that's going to replace those carbohydrates that they're burning off, versus the time when they don't do that. And how much energy you have when you start to go beyond that hour mark, when your body is running low on carbohydrates.
It's your breakfast cereals, right?
Yeah.
You read on it right? How many, 16 grams of whole grains or 40 grams of whole grain or whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. But that's been a very heavily processed, broken down food. It's going to hit your bloodstream fast, and it's not going to, you just don't have the nutrient quality that you do have in actual whole grains, right? And so I think it kind of goes back to our earlier discussion, right? Let's upgrade our foods, right? Mm-hmm. So instead of having, if we're going to say cut out carbs, let's say just cut out those highly refined processed carbs that you're eating every day, right? Replace them with more quality, longer digesting, more nutrient dense whole grains. Mm-hmm. And I think that ends up going a long way to take away a lot of the negative effects that we see of that high carb diet in America, right? Again, I don't think any of us agree that it's the grains themselves that are causing the problems. It's the high amount of sugar. It's the high amount of processing. It's the removing of beneficial nutrients and then gluing everything back together and throwing a mix of vitamins in and saying, oh, that's healthy, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. When you have that kind of relationship with food, where instead of thinking cutting out a whole food group, but upgrading it instead, you're really allowing yourself to be able to focus on those things that are going to be positive for you, as opposed to focusing on the things that are bad for you and feeling bad about yourself whenever you do break down and have that. You indulge in whatever it is that is your sweet spot from your Reese's peanut butter cups. And that can create an unhealthy relationship with food. And when you have that unhealthy relationship, it really is kind of a snowball of effect of, once you start to have that unhealthy relationship, you start feeling negative and you start getting depressed. And like we said, there is a huge problem with emotional eating and being able to control what you're eating during those times. And so moderation as opposed to is cutting out an entire group.
Exactly.
Yeah. And one of the discussions that we had earlier was what tends to happen in athletes, right? When they're just so concerned about their bodies and what they're taking in and what they're not taking in, et cetera, is that when we focus on like good things and bad things, I think that really creates a fertile breeding ground to continue that development of unhealthy relationships with food, which can trend toward disorder eating and some of the problems that we see there. And like those are things that we want to avoid. So I really like that. Like if we take a positive take on what we're eating, right? Like how is this beneficial to me? And like what is this doing for me? And how does it help my performance? And how does it help my goals? And how does it help me to live a healthy lifestyle instead of like, oh man, I didn't do this and I feel really bad, or I ate too much of this, or I snuck this, right? Like I think if we just put everything out on the open, shine a light on it and say, hey, like we're working on healthier behaviors as a whole. Like you don't have to feel terrible. You don't have to live in shame for having your Reese's peanut butter cup or for, doing this or for going out and having pizza with your buddies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like let's say
live life a little bit.
Yeah, right? Like, we gotta enjoy our foods.
And
but
like golly, I'm gonna eat a chocolate cake on my birthday.
Yes, amen.
Celebrate.
Amen. You gotta do that. But like when we just kind of, like I said, shine a light on that and are really honest with ourselves about our goals and what we're eating and why we're eating. And like we let ourselves be okay with making mistakes and not putting so much pressure on ourselves to be perfect. I think that's really when that relationship with food blossoms and we are able to eat healthier and we're able to live healthier and we're able to develop healthier habits and behaviors around food, which I think ends up translating into other areas of our life as well.
Totally. I thought about this while you're talking. Instead of labeling food as this is good or this is bad, I think we should get rid of that language. No food is good and no food is bad, right? And like we've mentioned already, establishing that healthy relationship with food. Just know that, this Reese's peanut butter cup isn't going to give me the same kind of nutrients that maybe I need right now, or I know it's not going to give me those nutrients that I need right now, but I'm choosing to enjoy it right now, and maybe I just won't eat as big of a dinner later, or something like that.
Yeah. And I'm okay with eating that and I don't have to feel bad as a result, right? That was my choice and I understand the consequences and there's no judgment around that choice.
But it's not necessarily good and it's not necessarily bad.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it.
I like the little excerpt he had on how maybe female athletes, if they get too low on body fat, it's actually bad and it's going to mess with hormones. And he said maybe it's a good idea for especially females to be okay with maybe an extra few pounds if that means your hormones are functioning properly, which in result means you're going to perform better.
Yeah.
Instead of being obsessed with dropping all that fat.
Do you by chance remember what those percentages were for those? I think it was like, just off the top of my head from like past things I studied, I was thinking women were like 12%, 10 to 12, and then men were like at the lowest 5.
Yeah, because you have to have a permissible level. I think, men is like 2, it's like between 2 and 5%, I think, for men. And then, like 10 to 12% minimum for women, something like that.
I kind of would like to hit the point of, I know I'm kind of catering towards female athletes because I know what it's like, but I want to
I think that's good perspective.
Talk about how the goal should never, personally, I don't think the goal should ever be getting a good-looking body and losing weight. The goal should always be, how can I live my life to the fullest? How can I have energy? How can I feel good? And then the weight dropping off and you maybe, toning up a little bit, that's just a cool little bonus.
Yeah, it's like a consequence of living a good life.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Which is
So I
like
to talk about that.
a much better perspective. And that was one of the things that like really bothered me is in this chapter is multiple times it was like, you know, if you do this, like you'll shed fat. And if you want abs of steel, I know I didn't say it in that exact language, but that was the idea, right? Like if you eat this way, if you practice this way, like you'll get abs like this, which again, like that shouldn't be the focus. Well, that might be nice, right? I think we don't like, you know, I think that's one of the probably damaging effects of our culture is that we do have it in our mind like, oh man, I mean, like, wouldn't that be cool to have that like Adonis-like physique, and wouldn't it be cool to like have abs for days, right? Like, I think that that's something that we've all developed over time. But again, yeah, when that becomes our focus, I think it's much easier to develop those poor eating patterns or poor exercise patterns. Right, one of the things, and like I think it'd be great to talk about your experience, and you mentioned this, right? The perspective of a female athlete and some of the things that you've experienced there, because what we see really commonly, especially in that population, is you know, an intense amount of exercise and food restriction, right? And especially fat restriction, which leads to a whole host of problems, which not only affect you physically but mentally as well.
For sure. My experience is I'm obviously not built to be a runner. When you look at a runner, they're incredibly skinny, right? And just like genetically, biologically, if you're really skinny, you're probably going to be a better runner. And personally, I'm just not built that way. My bones are a little bit bigger. And in the past, I have struggled with that. And I look at these other really skinny girl runners and I'm like, man, like I don't look like that. And I was actually embarrassed to tell people that I run because I don't look like a runner. And I'm bringing up this Facebook page again. I need to get off Facebook. But the Run for Fun Facebook page, I see people postings all the time of, I know I don't look like a runner, but I'm still a runner. And I think that's great. And I don't think anyone, and I'm sure, I know that men feel this way too. If you love to run, just run. It doesn't matter how you look. You don't have to look like a runner to be a runner. You just got to do what you love. And I have seen you know, bulkier men and women who are actually really great runners. We should never be ashamed of our body and how it looks. And again, if your mind is in a good place and you love yourself, I think you're gonna perform better than if you're just completely shaming yourself and starving yourself and
definitely.
Right.
You're putting your own roadblock in front of yourself when you're judging yourself based on what you look like instead of what you can actually do. And so it's really important that we get rid of this, you know, this is what a runner looks like. Because when we're focused just on what runners look like, that's when we start to get those negative emotions about our own bodies and can fall into the trap of, you know, eating disorders or exercise addiction or different issues that we see all the time among runners, because they're comparing themselves to what someone else is doing as opposed to what they can do. Cool. Our bodies are amazing and they're going to do what they're made to do. And so if we're out there training and running, bodies are naturally going to adapt to become better runners and better athletes. And so just doing the best we can do as opposed to comparing ourselves to what we think we should look like is going to be important.
I love that. That's so true. And you're right, that kind of motivation that's not going to get you anywhere. That motivation is going to fail you if it's all about how I look and trying to look like a runner. That's not going to take you to the finish line.
There's always going to be someone that you view as looking more like a runner than you are. You're never going to be satisfied.
Exactly. And then, you know, your motivation is in the wrong place, and that's not going to sustain you to taking you to become the best athlete that you can be.
Yeah, guys, I'm getting tingles over here. This is great stuff. I love that conversation, and I think like hopefully more than anything else that we've discussed is as far as nutrients and different types of the diet is really that mindset, because I think that ends up being key to not only success in like building a healthy diet, but also success in a runner as performance and ultimately success as a human being. Right? We've really developed I feel like most of us have developed blankets of shame, let's call it, right? And we wrap ourselves in those and we hide ourselves in those, and they contribute to like, you know, a lot of those bad effects, right? The depression and anxiety and those huge judgments about ourselves, and especially in comparison to other people. And so I think just as we take time to really get in touch with ourselves and to learn to love ourselves, I think that ends up being really beneficial overall. And there's so many resources available to us to to help manage those things. And so I think just right, maybe there's a good plug for mental health, right? Like for making sure that you're taking care of yourself, your body, and your mind, and finding appropriate professional help when we do lead into things like disordered eating or really depressive states and things like that. And I think there's just some really good authors out there that I've really loved in talking about topics like that. Brene Brown is a great one to check out in terms of shame research. She has a really good podcast, Unlocking Us. I think there's been some really good books written about that and some really great things to say about those topics. But just, I think, really driving that point home, right? Like, don't compare yourself to others. And that's a hard thing, right? Like, don't do this. But learning to love yourself, learning to love your body, and learning to make goals based on, like, how you want to feel and who you want to be instead of how you should look or how much like this other person you should be. Yeah.
I love that. And I just want to say one more thing. One of the things that I love about running is I feel like it is all about self-improvement. It's all about being better than you were yesterday. It's not about, sure, you got your races and you want to try to beat people. There's nothing wrong with healthy competition. But it's all about, I'm going to try to be my best PR, right? And I'm not going to look at the people around me. I'm just going to try to be better than I was yesterday. And that was kind of that's the passion that I've built through running that I want to share with other people.
Yeah, focus on all the amazing things you've accomplished. Even if you're just starting with running, or any endurance or any sport for that instance, think about where you were prior to doing that and where you are now. I guarantee even if you only run for one day, that's a huge accomplishment. You convinced yourself to get out and work hard and do something you hadn't done before. And the same thing goes with nutrition. If you make one choice a day where you're like, okay, I'm going to put down whatever this is and I'm going to pick up this fruit or vegetable and eat that instead, that's awesome. Like, you're making improvements, you're getting better, and you should celebrate that. Instead of focusing on what you're doing instead of focusing on what you're doing wrong, let's focus on what we're doing right and just try to do more of those things that we're doing right.
Wow.
Bam. Wow. Mic drops right there.
So gospel.
I know. No, this is it's been good.
Yeah. It's been.
Nothing. We're left speechless. You left us speechless, Preston.
All right.
No, I think that's probably a good note to end it on. I really love that, right? Like, focus on the good, focus on what you can do, and I think that'll go a long way in leading you to where you want to be. So, thanks so much for joining us today. It's been a great conversation, really great ideas, especially I love those last 5 minutes. Like, that was some that was some solid good advice. Like, I downloaded from YouTube, so that was awesome. Yeah, for sure. So. Join us next week as we continue to discuss. I'm going to steal your book because mine is over there.
There's an Apple
Primal?
sticker on it.
Oh! I thought it was like Apple computer. Yes, eat healthy. Apple is the food. It's not the computers. Join us next week as we continue this discussion and dive into how we can improve ourselves as athletes and as human beings in general. I think.
Perfect. Thank you, guys.